Okay, let's talk outcome measures. For this module, I am recording two separate videos, hoping to have a little bit shorter runtime for each one. So let me know if you prefer having the separate videos. Maybe that's easier to consume these, or if you'd rather just have one a little bit longer video. If you remember from last week, the video went on for about half an hour. So let me know if you like the shorter format or to like in multiple chunks, or if you would prefer a single video. So we're talking about outcomes, and in the guise of assessment, the whole purpose of having outcome statements is having something that we can readily measure and make sure that we have a clear sense of what we're hoping to accomplish or what we hope that participants who engage in our programs and activities accomplish. So why are learning outcomes important? Outcomes give us something concrete that we can act on and measure. Outcomes hopefully provide some sort of direction for our attention, but we need to focus on the experiences that we hope lead to those outcomes. What would be the point of a well-crafted learning outcome if we don't attend to the experience that should ultimately lead to that outcome? So in other words, we want to make sure that we're using the outcome both as a means to give us something to measure and collect data about, but also outcomes should drive our actions. They should give us a clear sense of direction of where we're trying to go. So in many ways, outcome statements can be seen as extensions of a mission statement or strategic goals even. Outcomes have to be part of a bigger picture. And really, we want to make sure that we're structuring outcomes so that they point towards positive change and growth. Outcomes and measurement of those outcomes can help us demonstrate that we're doing what we said we would do and that students are learning what we said they would learn. So again, thinking about outcomes and how to craft them and how to structure them, we need to have an eye on moving forward and moving upward. So it's all about having outcome statements that help us think about ways to achieve growth for our programs and our services and for those who participate in those programs and services. When it comes to approaches to writing learning outcomes, there are some different formulaic approaches to writing learning outcomes that I find useful. But before we get into those, I have a quick story about approaching learning outcomes from a more organic frame. When I was a professional hall director at the University of South Carolina, one year during our staff training with our graduate assistants and the professional staff, our new director of residence life issued a charge to all of us. And that charge was to write learning outcomes for the students who live in our individual halls. So we divided into our working groups, which were the geographic areas of campus, and got to work. Well, for those of us who had been paying attention to things that the director said, we had a sense of what we were supposed to do. Tim, the director, had been talking about helping our students learn and grow, and needing at least a basic understanding of student development theory to frame our approaches to helping students learn and grow through the college years. That meant that our learning outcomes task was basically to identify the things we should be doing to help students learn and grow as a result of living in our residence halls. I don't remember any of the specifics of what we wrote down for those learning outcomes, and this was back in 2000 or 2001, but I do remember the value of those organic conversations. I remember the way that having those conversations actually carried on into the academic year as we had our staff meetings as a group of professional and graduate student staff, but also as the way that a number of us actually went about our day-to-day work. Not that we were talking about student development theory and how to infuse it into assessment on a daily basis. In fact, I don't really remember talking about the assessment aspect or even using the word assessment. But I remember having conversations and framing those conversations around what we hoped our students were getting out of their experiences in our facilities and with our programs and activities. So let's look at some of the different formulaic or framework approaches to writing learning outcomes. So this might look confusing at first, but I'll guide us through it. And as we look through it, the first thing is we need to know who we're talking about. So number one, our population. So let's say that we start with students. Seems pretty obvious to me, since that's the work that generally we are engaged in, is helping students learn and grow. So students who? So this is basically think of this almost like a Mad Libs. Learning outcomes Mad Libs. There's how I'm going to make tens of dollars. So students who, and then we need to identify a learning experience. And let's just say participate in. So students who participate in, and then we've got some sort of activity. Students who participate in a service learning project. So we've got a population, a learning experience, an activity, and then the next part is a given piece. Number 4, will be able to. And then we need to have some sort of action verb. And this needs to be a single verb. So let's say discuss. So students who participate in a service learning program will be able to discuss. Then for number 6, to what degree? So this is a quantifiable type of aspect. So let's say we have students who participate in a service learning activity will be able to discuss at least 3, and then the last piece, what's the evidence that is being discussed or being addressed with the learning outcome. So let's say that evidence is approaches to addressing the student hunger crisis. So our complete learning outcome statement would be students who participate in a service learning program will be able to discuss at least 3 strategies for addressing the student homelessness or student hunger program. So it's pretty specific, and this can be a pretty good, easy framework to work with, I think, once you have a sense of kind of the progression and what each of these pieces represent. So let's go through a couple of examples. And again, these are going to be available to you through the full slide deck on Canvas, so you can look at these. I'm going to also include this slide as a blank worksheet for you. You'll see there'll be a number of rows. It's not something you need to turn in. It's not a homework assignment. You might find it helpful, however, for the learning outcomes assignment that will be due soon. So these examples, the population is graduate assistants. The learning experience is participate in. The activity is professional development. Will be able to is a given. And then demonstrate at least 3 approaches to networking and as evidenced by reflections shared in a blog post. And then the second one, residential students who attend new resident meetings will be able to identify at least 2 sources on campus for academic help by completing an online assessment quiz. So both different, but really you can see there's some really common pieces here. And writing outcome statements doesn't have to be this nebulous type of experience. We can use some formulas to help break it down. In fact, there's another one I like as well. And it's a little blurry on the screen. I've got a clearer image of this that I'm going to post on Canvas. So this is the ABC and sometimes D. So this is, I think, a way to kind of condense and boil down the other formulas for writing learning outcome statements or outcome statements and focusing really on the who, the what, and really it's two what's, the condition, behavior. So the audience, the condition, the behavior, and sometimes we include the degree, but not always. So here we have one example of, as a result of participating in the community law project, which is the condition, students, or the audience, will be able to explain at least 3 of the most important social issues facing the population they served. And so then that last piece targets the behavior. So I think this one can be useful as well. I don't have, well, here, I do have a breakdown, sorry about that, of kind of what this can look like. So the condition is, as a result of participating in the professional development workshop, graduate assistants, and then the degree, will be able to demonstrate at least 3 approaches to networking, and then the behavior by posting a blog entry. So it's the same one from 2 slides ago. It's just put into a different formula. It's the same stuff, and again, it's a way. It depends on how these make sense to you. Which one makes the most sense to figuring out how to approach writing outcome statements. And so I, at one time, asked some folks on Twitter to share their thoughts on writing learning outcomes. And here's what Bob Alston provided this graphic. And this is a way of thinking about orders of thinking. So lower orders of thinking would be remembering and understanding. Then higher order thinking relates to creating, evaluating, analyzing, and to a lesser degree, applying. And so it's important to think about that because we really want to make sure that there's some sort of progression in learning outcomes as much as possible, either across the span of a curriculum. So we see that in the PSE program, where we have some courses that have very introductory in nature and others build upon each other. And so there are learning outcomes in this course that would not be possible to address without the prerequisite of ADM630. And so we're able to look more at the applying and the other higher order thinking skills for the learning outcomes for ADM735. This wheel is an adaptation of Bloom's taxonomy. And the previous image from Bob Alston was also an adaptation of Bloom's taxonomy. And Bloom's taxonomy is a perspective of progression from lower order to higher order thinking skills. And what this wheel shows are the orders here in the center, moving from knowledge and then going clockwise over to evaluation. The orange ring are verbs that are most commonly utilized within that order, within that level of thinking. And then the green ring on the outside might be a deliverable or a product that would be produced or made congruent with this particular knowledge domain. So this is one that I actually use. I have this posted in my office on my bulletin board so that when I'm writing learning outcomes or helping evaluate learning outcomes, either for class assignments or when folks in my professional networks seek out some advice or some help, I have this as a handy go-to. So I find this to be a really useful tool to have at my disposal. And to wrap up this portion of the video before we switch into the second video, this is another perspective on the Bloom's taxonomy. And you notice there's a little bit different. There have been some changes in the language that's used around some of these realms, but these are all connected to Web 2.0 tools. So what are some apps or Web 2.0 tools that someone might use in the context of pursuing an outcome, a learning outcome at each of these knowledge domains? So just another perspective on kind of thinking through learning outcomes and trying to craft those in a way that demonstrates very clearly what's expected in terms of being able to evaluate that individual outcome statement.